Good morning. This is Tracy Hales Vass, right on Four Corners. Today, I'll be talking to Rosemary Zibart about her books True Brit, Beatrice, 1940, and Forced Journey, the Saga of Werner Berlinger. Good morning, Rosemary.
Good morning.
I have to tell you, I really enjoyed your young adult novels that I've read. True Brit, Beatrice, 1940, and Forced Journey, the Saga of Werner Berlinger.
Yes.
Well, before we go into it, why don't you give our listeners a little summary of these two books?
Well, Forced Journey is about a 12-year-old German boy, Werner, who is given a ticket by his father to go to the United States. It's 1939, and he's Jewish, and most Jews by that time realize that they're in a lot of trouble, and his father is able to muster the money for one ticket, and he gives it to his son. And so Werner travels on his own to the United States and ends up staying with a relative on 2nd Avenue in New York City, and kind of has to make it on his own, trying to find a secure home and hoping that his father and sister can follow him.
Right, and his relative that he's staying with is an invalid.
Yes, so he ends up more taking care of her. She's a lovely, very kind person, but he ends up taking care of her more than she takes care of him, actually. So it's a challenging situation from the get-go, but he meets a lot of people and sort of resolves the situation for himself.
Yes, he becomes a very strong person in this.
Yeah, I am very, very fond of that book, and not only when I was writing it, because I researched it with the true accounts. There was about 12 to 1,400 Jewish children who were able to come to the United States in the late 1930s on their own. Immigration for Jews had almost completely been shut down for adults, but these 1,400 children were able to come. And I researched accounts of what that was like, and then I had the great fortune to meet actually a couple of these individuals and talk to them personally.
Oh, wow. Fascinating stories. Before we go on with Werner's story, let's talk about True Brit.
Well, True Brit is also about dislocation during war. It's also about a World War II story. It's about an English girl who leaves England during the Blitz and comes to the United States, ending up in Santa Fe, and she's hosted in Santa Fe by a public health nurse, Clementine Pope. And Beatriz is sort of a spoiled English girl.
Right.
And she must learn to sort of fend for herself, and that's what she learns how to do. She sort of gains the gumption from Clem, who's a very self-reliant and strong-willed character.
She is a great character, Clem.
Yeah, everybody really likes Clem, and
Yes.
I modeled her off after a few women that I had known in my life.
So what age group are these both written for?
I think that we put 10 and up on them because they both of them won the New Mexico Book Award for historic fiction. They didn't win in the juvenile division. They won in historic fiction, which is really for all ages.
Right.
And I've had people of all ages reading these books.
I was going to say, it's very readable for an adult also.
Totally. So I've had, young people of 9 or 10 read the book, and I've also had people my age reading the book.
Right. I can see why. Yes, well, congratulations on the awards.
Thank you. I was very, very pleased to receive those awards, frankly.
Well deserved, because you did a lot of research on these both.
I did. I did a lot of research on both of them, although I find in my storytelling, I have a certain story I want to tell, and then I sort of find I feel fortunate when the information fits the story.
Right. And that doesn't always happen, but you've made it work really well.
Well, you tend to, what I've discovered is you tend to, or at least I tend to, read page after page after page of factual documentation, and then you'll find one little episode or one little sentence or one little description that really fits what
Right.
you're trying to get across.
Exactly.
And you seize upon that.
You do. That's very true. So I really like all the characters, really. And like you were saying with Werner Berlinger, he's got some street friends, and he's got a very exclusive young woman that he fancies.
Yes, exactly. I felt like with both of the children experience what I would say severe culture shock. With Beatriz, she's encountering, of course, Hispanics and Native Americans and plain old Americans, and so that's a culture shock, and also people who are not of her upper class background.
Right.
And that's a big adjustment for her. And with Werner, I realized when we did teacher guides for both of these, because I think both books are great for teaching American history at that particular for children of those ages.
Right.
And it's all about prejudices.
Yes.
You know, racial prejudices, ethnic prejudices, economic privileges, all sorts of, practically every chapter deals with a different kind of prejudice.
That's right.
And that was really important for me. I mean, when you write a book, you don't always know what the book's about until you've actually finished it.
That's true. I was impressed with Werner's story. It was so shocking to him, and you showed how shocking it was to him to have the bias against him.
The bias for him being a foreign-born, for being an immigrant.
And for being a Jew.
Right.
Yeah. And that, I think a lot of people don't realize what was going on during that era and during that war, and I think you've done a good job in showing just one piece of it.
Well, I think it's obviously really important. I mean, that's why I write for that age group, middle grade, what they call middle grade age group, because you're trying to stretch kids' minds.
Right.
You're trying to get them to see that there are other kinds of people in the world, and they don't live the same way, and they have different values, but they're still people. They still have feelings, and they're still important. And, yeah, I mean, it's a shock. There's a lot of people who are very resistant to acknowledging the level of prejudice which still goes on in our country.
Right.
But certainly went on then. Even at that time, Eleanor Roosevelt wanted to institute legislation in the Congress that would allow 10,000 Jewish children to enter the country.
Right.
After the episode called Kristallnacht in Germany, which was a terrible evening where a lot of Jewish stores and synagogues were destroyed and people were just pulled out of their houses and beaten up in the streets. It was very clear that the Jewish population in Germany was in great danger.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so she tried to get this legislation passed in Congress, but even at that time, there was so much prejudice in this country that it didn't pass. It did pass, in England, and England had a program called Kindertransport, and about 10,000 children were able to, their parents literally just pushed them onto trains, and they were able to leave the country.
Wow. And I actually myself did not know that there were some European children that were hosted by people in this country.
In this country.
Yes.
Right. I actually discovered that quite innocuously. I was reading the Santa Fe New Mexican one morning, and I looked at the 50 years ago today column, and it said that 4 English girls had arrived in Santa Fe, and that they were going to be hosted by a Santa Fe family, and they were hosted for the duration of the war. And their parents were not afraid so much of the bombing as they were afraid that Hitler would actually succeed in defeating England, and they didn't want their children to grow up under a Nazi regime, and that's why they sent them to the United States. So there was 13,000 British children who left England and Scotland for Canada, the United States, and Australia.
That's amazing. And I'm sure that a person like Clem would have been one who volunteered to host a child.
Right.
Exactly. She's a great character. She's an unmarried woman who is a public nurse, and she's rough and tumble.
Yeah, she definitely was. I was lucky enough to come across a book in the library called The Nurse and the Indians. And it was about a woman who, I think she was the first supervisor of the Indian Health Services, something like that. Anyway, it back in the 20s, actually, 20s and 30s. And she went around in her Model T, drove around to the Sioux Indian Reservation, and she eventually ended up here in Santa Fe. But so I had read about her, and I'd also read about various public health nurses. One of them was named Augusta Stahl, and there were several of them who did work out here with the Native American Pueblos because health care was so poor, or if not non-existent. There was diphtheria was a disease which was regularly plagued the Pueblos, and trachoma, which is an eye disease, was a very persistent problem. And so these public health nurses did a lot of good.
And Clem took our little Beatrice up to experience some of these health-giving.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. She takes her to a Native American Pueblo, which is having a bout with diphtheria. And it's initially a really scary experience.
Yes.
For Beatriz. She's completely out of her element.
She is.
And but she realizes that it's a good place to be, and she wants to be on the side of the people who are doing something rather than the people who are just sitting back and watching or not doing anything.
Exactly.
So that's how she makes her decision.
That scene there where or several scenes, that section there where she goes up to the Pueblo with Clem, I think is her true character arc.
Yeah, definitely. She has to end up driving the truck. You know, they go through some villages up there, and she definitely has to show her own gumption.
She does. This is a girl who her parents never drove. They always had a driver to drive them.
A chauffeur, right.
Exactly.
So now Clem teaches her how to change a tire.
Right.
Clem is coming down with a really bad cold, so Beatrice is forced to help her because there's no one else around. I mean, roads weren't that well utilized at that time.
Right.
So Beatrice really learns how to become much more self-sufficient.
Yes, I loved that. It was a very good character arc there and character sketch. I liked her. And Werner's story covers a longer period of his life than Beatrice's.
It has an epilogue that goes to him growing up and joining the army and going back to Europe. But in the first chapters, I guess, are probably maybe cover 4 or 5 months.
That's true.
Not a huge length of time.
Right. And those are very important months where he's got so many oppositions coming from different places.
Yeah. He's the jealous suitor
of
his host.
Yes.
Who really gives him a hard time and wishes he wasn't there. And
right.
He does. He rescues his friend Annika from her Park Avenue apartment.
That's
they end up in Central Park.
Right. And make a friend there who helps them out.
Right. They go with a African American to Harlem. So
Right.
he gets to experience the whole city.
He does.
Top to bottom, basically.
So you've spent time in New York City?
Yes, I do. My mother's from Manhattan, and so I haven't spent a huge amount of time by the time I'd written that book. I've spent more time since then, but I certainly have a feel for the city.
Yes.
I tried to convey that as much as possible.
And you did, definitely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to read something for our audience?
Oh gosh, here I've got Beatrice.
Okay, great.
Uncle Diego is having a party, Arabella exclaimed only days later. Everybody is invited. It's on Wednesday night. Everyone? Even us? I asked. A party at night? Arabella nodded. Yes, it's the night before Halloween, but people won't wear masks and costumes. Uncle Diego doesn't care for masks and costumes. Still, I can't believe we're invited, I exclaimed. In England, children are never invited to grown-up parties. At Santa Fe parties, anyone can come, Arabella said, and you never know who might show up. A Hollywood movie star, a mountain man straight from the Rockies, even an opera singer. I looked at Arabella. I knew she was thinking about her own mother who'd been working in New York for several months. She dialed up her daughter almost every evening while preparing for a performance. Nevertheless, Arabella missed her as much as I missed my family. Do you think Steve will go to the party? I had thoughts Esteban might behave differently after showing me his ponies, but he didn't. He still talked almost entirely about baseball or the war. Indians are warriors, he had exclaimed proudly. That's why they go to fight in every battle. Yes, Steve will be there, said Arabella. Dolores is fixing tamales, so he'll bring them to the studio. Tamales? What are tamales? I asked. You'll find out, said Arabella with a grin. I guess your uncle must be feeling better if he's having a party. Arabella nodded. He's finished his portrait of Lola, and that makes him feel like she's still around. I have to say that I'm introducing so many people that I haven't talked about in this particular section. You haven't heard about her she has a crush on this boy named Esteban who insists that she call him Steve when he's at school.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Arabella, her friend, who lives with her uncle, who's sort of a bohemian painter.
Yes.
So I sort of pull that aspect into Santa Fe.
Yes.
And Steve's mother is the housekeeper, Dolores.
Right.
And she lives at Clem's house.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of feel like I have to tell you about these parts before I read.
Yeah, they're important people.
Right. And I've written a second book, a sequel to this, which is going to be published in the coming years.
A sequel to True Brit?
Yes, it's a sequel to True Brit, which takes place, it opens on Pearl Harbor, and so it's the first couple of months of 1942 when the United States was preparing to go to war.
Mm-hmm.
And the crisis at this point for Beatrice is, well, first of all, she can't go back to England, and there was two reasons for that. The bombing of London had stopped, even though there was still bombing elsewhere in England. But it was very dangerous to travel on the Atlantic because of the German U-boats. So one ship of children had already been bombed, so or torpedoed. So she can't go back to England. So that's one thing. And then number two, Clem is called to Washington to train other nurses, so she's going to have to find another place to live, and that's another crisis. And then the third big incident, which is the kind of the focus of this particular book, is that a Japanese internment camp is built on the edge of Santa Fe.
Oh my!
Did you know that? Did you know that?
Oh,
there was a Japanese
that's
internment
true.
camp there?
No.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh my!
Definitely. And so that's, again, she's having to deal with local prejudices
Oh,
and
yes.
anger because, of course, the New Mexico regiment
Mm-hmm.
had been fighting in the Bataan and had been captured by the Japanese. So New Mexican boys were in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, while Japanese prisoners were living on the edge of Santa Fe.
Oh,
So it was a very tense situation.
absolutely. Again, you've done your research. When will that be coming out?
I think it's coming out exactly a year from now.
Great.
The book's all written,
Mm-hmm.
and I am checking up on, I'm having the manuscript looked over by various people, but
Great.
other than that, we just have to get it into print, and
Right.
that's the responsibility of my publisher,
Yes.
Artemisia Press, who's a wonderful publisher. I think you know Jeff Hammond.
I do, and he's been great. He's introduced he introduced me to you, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, he's a very good publisher to work with.
I've heard
Gives me
that.
a lot of, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate.
Mm-hmm. So you are also a playwright.
Yes, I am a playwright, but before I talk about my plays,
Yes.
I'd like to talk about my two picture books.
Okay, yes.
One of them is my most popular book. It's called I Have a Grandma Who,
Oh.
and it's a picture book celebrating all different kinds of grandmothers. Grandmothers who bike, and grandmothers who hike, and grandmothers who sing, and grandmothers who swim, and grandmothers who garden, and grandmothers who read. Every page is a different kind of grandma,
Oh.
and that's a really fun book.
And that's for younger kids.
Yes, that's for younger kids,
Oh.
3 or 4-year-olds.
I have a grandma who.
Yes, I Have a Grandma Who, and you can purchase it on Amazon, or
Okay.
it's available at all the bookstores in Santa Fe.
Great.
Not just the bookstores in Santa Fe; it's available just about every little store in Santa Fe
Oh,
sells
good.
it because it's just a really good seller.
That's nice.
And the farmers market store sells it, and Indigo Baby sells it, and Doodle It sells it. Anyway, so that's a popular book. And then my other book,
Mm-hmm.
30 years ago, I was a foster parent for 3 years, and we
Oh,
had
my.
13 different children coming
Oh.
through our home. So I wrote a book called Kit Coyote, A Brave Pup, and that's 4 foster children.
Oh.
And, that's a really charmingly illustrated story of what it's like for a little kid to end up in foster care, and the kinds of experiences that he or she will have, and how to survive and thrive in foster care.
Oh, well, that's great. And that's for younger kids also?
It's for ages 4 to 10.
Okay. So you have, with all your books, you've covered the gamut of age groups, haven't you?
Well, I do like writing for children, I have to admit.
Mm-hmm.
But then I write plays, and those are for adults,
Okay.
mostly. I have 1 or 2 plays for children, but I have about a half a dozen full-length plays for adults.
And how does playwriting help you write fiction?
Well, it's all storytelling,
Uh-huh.
and let's see, you need drama in
Mhm.
all. You know, you
Right.
need a character arc in all.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, some stories just call out and say this is a play. You know, a play needs to be, to me, it's much more compressed in
Right.
space and time. So usually you have it happen over a few days, or even 1 day,
Mm-hmm.
and is limited in terms of space as much as possible. You
Right,
couldn't
that's
do a
true.
book like True Brit
Right.
adequately, I don't think, or either of those books really.
Right.
It's mostly just the crux of human relationships.
Interesting.
Right.
Mm.
so it's easier to go probably from a play to a book.
Mm-hmm.
I have gone from a play to a book, and this was a book for young people. I mean, it was a play for young people. Right. It was about the first woman physician, Elizabeth Blackwell.
Oh.
And I decided to turn it into a middle grade novel. And I thought it would be relatively easy. I thought I could just flesh out the scenes.
Right.
And that it would be very straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
But it took a totally different life of its own and became a whole different, just a whole completely different.
Interesting.
It was amazing.
Yeah. I love that when that happens and a story tells itself sometimes.
It's very exciting. I'm
Mm-hmm.
always happy when I'm working on, when I'm in the middle of working on a project. That's the happiest I am.
I can
when
understand
I'm right in the
that.
middle of something, I can wake up in the morning and think, oh boy.
I get to get back to that, yes.
Yeah, I can't get back to that and see what happens today. That's a really great place to be.
And you have a website.
I do. I have a couple of websites, actually.
Okay.
I have my author website is just www.rosemaryzibart, ZIBART.com. And then I have a special website for my two picture books, and that's zproductions505.com.
zproductions505.com.
Right, because I published those two books because it's a very different kind of a market than my middle grade books.
Yes. What are you working on now since you've just finished True Brit's sequel?
I'm actually, aside from trying to get those out in the world,
mm-hmm.
I am working on a screenplay.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, good for you. You keep busy then.
I do. It's sometimes it's more of a challenge than other times. You start moving off in one direction, and
it's true.
Yeah.
I know.
Are you a writer?
I am a writer.
Oh, nice. And
yes.
What are you working on?
I write short stories, but I do have a novel that's almost finished.
How great.
Mm-hmm. And
I consider short stories to be very demanding.
They are. They are. You got to tell everything you can in just this
in a very
time.
small length of time. You have all of the demands.
Yes, but I admire novel writers because I'm seeing what a lot of work it is to sustain that.
Well, that's true, but I think I kind of fudge with books for young people because they're not near as long as adult novels.
That's true.
They're only about between 30 and 50,000 words, and an adult novel is at least 80.
Right. That's true. Yes. Well, we're just about out of time. Is there anything else you want to add, Rosemary?
No, just that these books are all available. Hopefully they're in your library, and they're, in my opinion, really good for schools or for homeschooling.
Yes.
For kids to learn about the war years here in the United States.
Right.
I guess I started to say that about Werner Berlinger,
mm-hmm.
Just that people write in different ways about the Holocaust, but I wrote about it more in the shock of learning about it
right.
rather than exactly experiencing it.
And how it affects everybody, even those in America.
Right.
I thought that was a really good approach to that.
Well, thank you so much for giving me. It's always a privilege for an author to get to talk about our own work.
Absolutely, and I love this. I love talking to authors about their work.
And if you get up to Santa Fe, please let me know.
I certainly will. Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Take care, and good luck with your novel.
Why, thank you, Rosemary. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That was Rosemary Zibart talking with us today about True Brit, Beatrice 1940, Forced Journey, her children's books, her playwriting, and so much more. This is Tracy Hales-Vass, right on Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM, Farmington, New Mexico.